welcome you officially. We have a lot of people from many different countries. We had people signed up from 40 different countries, and it's great to see many of you putting in the chat where you're from. We are from Barbados and Vanuatu, who's actually living in Spain, Japan. So this webinar is organized by Sport and Sustainability International. And before we move forward with the webinar, I would like to just quickly introduce you to SandSI. SandSI, which stands for Sport and Sustainability International, is a global membership organization which is based in Switzerland, in Geneva. And to cut a long story short, we have 3 goals that we strive for towards 2030. We work towards climate, waste, and health improvements. We have goals to make the sports sector carbon neutral, eliminating waste, and reduce physical inactivity by 15%, contribute to existing programs like the Paris Agreement and the programs from the World Health Organization. There's much more to say about that, but that's not the purpose of this meeting. Briefly, SandSI is a membership organization which includes sport entities, non-sport entities, athletes, professionals, scholars, some clubs, some sport clubs, with one big theme, one big fil rouge. We speak the language of sport, and through sport, we would like to accelerate the debate and the action on sustainability. One of the things we do is what we call our SDG Sport Lab, which is a creative platform, as you can see here, to encourage, share, and support concrete initiatives that use sport to contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And today is a session where we speak specifically about youth, and I would like to pass on the floor to, or the microphone to Philippe, whom I know for many years right now, and who will be moderating us through this session about how can we engage with youth, how can we work with youth as a key actor in the international sport industry. Philippe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Geert. I hope you can all hear me, and welcome. It's great to have so many people from all corners of the planet. Good morning, good afternoon. So it all looks quite natural that I start with this very well-known SDG roadmap. As you have heard from Geert, SandSI advocates really for more sports, more sustainability in sports, and more sustainability through sports. So I will not go through the details of the roadmap for 2030, but I will give, for the next few minutes before we open the floor on the debate with Kate, Laura, and Babacar, I'll give a little bit of a framework and some reflections on where we stand with youth in sports from an engagement perspective to an empowerment perspective in terms of being leaders and delivering projects. So quite interestingly, as we speak about youth and sports, if I ask you to look for youth and sports on these 17 SDGs, you kind of struggle to really see these 2 words. So I suggest that between us today, for the next 45 or 50 minutes, we agree to add 2 SDGs unofficially, number 18 on physical activity and sports for all, and number 19 for youth leadership. And this brings me to that Youth 2030 strategy that was approved by the United Nations 3 years actually after the SDGs were adopted by all nations. So it's quite interesting to see that it seems as if somebody said, oh shoot, we forgot youth in these SDGs, so let's come up with a youth strategy a few years later. And that's a very nice, solid strategy, focusing on empowering young people to achieve their full potential, trying to work also on the notion of turning young people and young talents into agents of change, and saying that youth is at the core of this UN agenda for 2030. And I won't go through the details of these 5 key strategic pillars of the Youth 2030 strategy pushed by the UN, but you can see in bold here that it's focusing on amplifying youth voices, giving them a seat around the table, focusing on access to quality education and health, and also decent work employability is a key theme when tackling youth challenges around the planet. Safeguarding the rights of young people, and also leveraging on young talents as catalysts for peace. The question remains to see whether this Youth 2030 strategy is really embedded within national strategies, regional strategies, and sports organizations as well. And we move on in the next few minutes closer to the world of sports. In terms of continental or local strategies, interestingly, there's more and more continents or cities or regions who have adopted youth strategies. You have here a few words on the European strategy for youth. At a city level, there's a few pioneers. I know of Brisbane, who for a number of years, which has been quite active in terms of focusing on young agents of change. And of course, Brisbane is in Queensland, where they also have a strategy focusing on youth. And if we move on to another continent, if we move on to Africa, and we'll have Babacar in a few minutes speaking to us, there's also a very interesting move here, as last year there was an important meeting in Ethiopia looking at a proper youth strategy for the whole continent, which is the most youthful continent, as you all know. And even in Donald Trump's country, there's a national youth sports strategy in place, which is a strong sign and a good sign. Now it remains to be seen whether this is leveraged and activated to get people, young people, more active and to fight sedentarism, obesity, and other non-communicable disease. Moving closer to sport again, we can all agree, I guess, today as great fans and professionals of sport, that sport should be a rights access to physical activity, and sport should be a right for every child. And interestingly, last November, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the convention, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I went through this document, and quite interestingly, of course, in '89, it was a different world, but there's no real mention of sports and physical activity in this great document. This convention brought a lot of improvements in the quality of life of young people around the planet. But sadly, this urgency of ensuring that kids have more access, inclusive access to physical activity and the benefits of sport is kind of lacking. And I think there's a needed revision more than ever within these frameworks. And moving even closer to sports and looking at the Olympic movement, clearly, if you look at the Olympic Charter, there's in the fundamental principles a word on the practice of sport being a human right. This is hugely important in the sports movement. However, of course, there's still hundreds of thousands of kids around the planet who are sent to fields to grow cocoa or soy beans instead of really going to schools and practicing sports and enjoying the benefits of sports. So there's still a lot of work to be done to ensure that accessibility and to engage young people. I just wanted to come to this slide for 1 second, looking at the governance of sports within federations and other international governing bodies in sports. Interestingly, there's only a few of these organizations which have a decent youth policy, or very often they think they have a youth policy and strategy, but it focuses on grassroots developments, access to competition, the traditional pathway of an athlete within a sport, or it focuses on coach development and good quality coaching, which is great, but it's very much looking inside the federations or the organizations and not necessarily at ways to empower young talents within the governance of the sports, which is an entirely different story. And I think there's still a lot of work and a lot of developments needed in this field. When talking about sports and youth empowerment, I cannot avoid a quick mention of the founder of the Olympic movement, who said Olympism is the veneration of peaceful and confident youth. Remember that Coubertin was first and foremost an educator and a pedagogist, and he loved the values of sports and how it could build young individuals. Nowadays, President Bach is really enjoying also his time with young leaders and young talents. And Kate will tell us a little bit more about the IOC Young Leader program, but I did observe myself within the organization over the last few years quite an impressive change in the way young talents were given the floor and given a seat around the table. This is very encouraging. A little bit of a theoretical framework very quickly in 1 or 2 minutes as we talk about engagement and empowerment, notions that are not always obvious in sports organizations. Based on the experience over the years, I have designed this value chain of engagement with different levels of engagement when we talk engagement, for a lot of people, it's about communications. And communication is really about awareness, making sure that your target, in that case, youth, is aware of your brand, is aware of your organization, or is aware of your event. And you can do it well. And if you do it well, you promote your brand, your event, your organization, and then you turn your audience into supporters. They love it. They want to connect. And if you go a step further, you start to inspire your youth targets and audience. And if you manage to inspire them, they want to be part in whichever way they want to participate in the movement, in the sports, as in different capacities. And involving them, giving them opportunities to get involved is very important at this stage, so that they can participate as volunteers, as participants, as leaders, as coaches. And to me, the ultimate level of this engagement value chain is indeed empowerment. And empowerment is about taking a bit of a risk, because it's about entrusting young people. It's about giving them the opportunity to take the toolbox and to deliver. And it's about accepting that young people who are starting in their career path may not do it perfectly well the first time, but they may be mentored, they may be guided, but at least you are embracing the next generation of leaders by empowering young people. And that's hugely important in the world of sports, to remain relevant, to remain appealing for your audience in general. And we'll look very briefly at 3 examples of target groups among youth: local youth, athletes, young athletes, and young leaders will be the rest of the webinar as we talk about the IOC Young Leader program. Looking very briefly at local youth, I believe we had somebody signed up from Buenos Aires, but I will come back to Buenos Aires 1 second. We had the Youth Olympic Games in October 2018. What was fantastic in Buenos Aires is the work we did with the organizing committee, but first and foremost with the host city, with the local clubs, in engaging 1.2 million kids in the 4 years leading up to the games through clinics, sports initiations, chat with champions, etc. And there were a lot of programs bringing Olympic values and education into the schools to really inspire these kids and to get them active. Because in Buenos Aires, you have more than 40% of the kids that are overweight and obese and are not practicing sports enough. So that was quite an important achievement in terms of engaging with the local youth. And I believe that major sporting events have a lot to gain to really have a decent youth engagement strategy over the years in the lead up to the event, and then to make sure that this remains as a legacy post event. Engaging young athletes is hugely important for youth events. And starting from the very first edition of the Youth Olympic Games in 2010, young participants were engaged into different education activities to really learn a lot about the do's and don'ts of a career in sports, using new technologies, using role models, amazing champions who came and shared their passion, and also some do's and don'ts, and tackling some serious issues. Bottom left is a recent gamification the IOC developed on, it's called Draw the Line, which is really telling young athletes, when they have to say stop. And it's all about abuse and harassment in sports, which is sadly one of the cancers of sports right now when we talk about youth in sports. Bottom right is about health and performance, which was delivered last January again in Lausanne. It's all about testing athletes, looking at some of their strengths and challenges in terms of balance and body strength, and not just to improve performance, but also to avoid injuries. So quite a responsible approach to engaging and empowering young people and giving them the tools to perform in a sustainable way. And of course, we'll discuss about young leaders and what it takes to be a young leader, to be entrusted into delivering projects. So I'll share 1 or 2 more notions here before opening the debate with Kate. You may wonder, what is a youth policy? What is a youth strategy in the world of sports, in the sports movement? And to me, that's not a given. I'm just sharing here a few ideas and nuggets of things that I believe should appear in a youth policy and strategy within the sports movement. Of course, you need a clear view on participation and competition, but also on inclusion, on retention. Most of our countries see a major dropout of sports between the age of 14 and 18. You have half of the teenagers leaving organized sports. So there's a need really to have a solid participation strategy leading up to competition, which is not evil. Competition is good. It can be good with kids. There's certainly a value in learning how to compete, to win, to lose, etc. Another key nugget, of course, is about promoting active and healthy lifestyles. And here, sports organizations down to the local clubs have a real important role to play in welcoming anybody, whatever their physical capacities are. It's all about values, education, skills, and capacity building. So very important school of life. And that must be also definitely one of the key elements of a strategy in engaging and empowering young people. So a true engagement and empowerment strategy means also making sure that young people are given a voice within the governance of the sports organization. And here, of course, there's more ambitious projects or policies, depending on where you look, or depending on the sports or the countries you look at. And finally, and somehow sadly as well, I think that the physical and mental integrity of young people must definitely be part of such a policy or strategy. You all have heard about the terrible abuse in sports, be it in football in Argentina or in gymnastics in the US, and basically in any country, in any sport, this sad thing can happen and must be prevented by all means. At the bottom of it and across the board, there's a fundamental need to ensure there's enough accessibility and inclusion in whatever is being offered through sports. The sad reality for a lot of people is that they have too little access to safe places to practice sports, or there are barriers, including gender gaps and gender barriers in some countries and cultures. And of course, there's a series of principles that I believe are important, is that the whole policy or strategy should be driven towards action with key goals, key performance indicators. Otherwise, it just remains a nice push, couple of pages in a document, in a drawer somewhere that looks good on a website. But we are in a position to expect more than that from sports organization, because basically it should be in their DNA to be focusing on young people and engaging young people. I'm coming to an end, but I just wanted to pay tribute to another Geert from the Netherlands. This is Geert Hofstede. I don't know if, I guess many of you have heard about this gentleman. He died actually in February this year at 91. And he did an amazing work on trying to understand the differences in cultures in the way people run business and interact and deliver projects. And I came across quite some interesting readings in this field, and the way you compare countries and sometimes cultures and continents helps you better understand why some projects are easier to implement in some countries than in others. And on that slide, I took actually the 6 destinations of the last or next Youth Olympic Games, with the exception of Austria that I couldn't put on this one. But only one quick thing I wanted to mention: if you look at the power distance, which is really measuring whether there's a strong respect for hierarchy, or whether you live in a society that empowers everyone to take decisions and to make suggestions. Interestingly, Norway is the lowest on power distance, whereas some other countries such as Senegal or China are quite high on power distance. And that really, in retrospect, helped me understand why it was so much easier to implement youth engagement and youth empowerment projects in Norway than it was in China. And I hope, Babacar, that in Senegal we'll be able to break some of these cultural barriers to empower young people, instead of only respecting the good old chief in the village. Of course, there are sometimes stereotypes, exaggerations, there are exceptions, but it's quite interesting. And I can only illustrate this with this gentleman who's 22 years old, Sebastian, from the north end of Norway. He was appointed one of the young change makers in the lead up to the Lillehammer Youth Olympic Games, and he was picked by his local communities because he was a leader in the local clubs. He was a coach and a volunteer in different clubs, and he got trained in the lead up to the Youth Olympic Games and was a volunteer at games time. But what is even more interesting, he learned a lot, and he continued to develop his skills to the stage where last year he was appointed as a young member of NIF board, so the National Olympic Committee of Norway, which is also the Ministry of Sports, a very powerful organization. now has a rule whereby 2 members of their board must be below 26 years old on a permanent basis. And every member of NIF, every National Sports Federation, must have a member below 26 in their board. And I think that's a strong signal, a strong message from up north, that we can go towards youth empowerment, and it's worth it because it's about being more impactful and relevant in the long term. That's my last slide. I just wanted to come back to a quote from good old Coubertin. That was a quote during a speech he gave in Lausanne in 32 when he turned 70. The coming society will be altruistic or will be nothing. Choose between that and chaos. I found this quote quite amazing because he said this, he was very concerned about the future of youth, and he wrote this during the Big Depression in the 30s. Where millions of families and kids were thrown into poverty. And nowadays, with the COVID and with millions of kids that are being contained and restricted in terms of access to the beauty of physical activity and sports, that's becoming all the more relevant nowadays to also think about how sports organizations can contribute to the sort of reawakening after the COVID crisis. And there are other activists. This activist is now well known, and she was quiet for a couple of weeks, a month, and she's probably getting ready to make even more noise coming forward in the coming month. But I like also this boldness and this wake-up call to the older generation that has to be held accountable for some of the mess they created. This is true also in terms of quality of life of young people when it comes to accessing physical activity, healthy nutrition, and sports. And sports organizations must also be held accountable with public bodies also for these challenges faced by youth. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't take too much time, and we can jump on a debate now, asking Kate to switch on her mic. And I'm very happy and pleased to welcome Kate. Just to be transparent with all of you, Kate and I worked together for a couple of years at the IOC, working on 3 editions of the Youth Olympic Games. Kate is a senior project manager in the games department, working mostly on the games promotion, and she's been coordinating the IOC Young Leader program for the last couple of years since its inception in 2016. Welcome, Kate. Can you hear me? Can we all hear you?
I can. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Excellent, we can. Thank you so much. Welcome, thanks for joining. First question is really, tell us about the whole IOC Young Leader program, the raison d'etre of the program, when it started, how it grew, some of the milestones on the journey.
Sure, and then maybe you can flick through to support. Yeah. But Philippe's a little bit modest, I would say, because actually he was the father of the program, and I was the co-father back in 2015 when we first had the idea. But this really was born from observations we made during the Youth Olympic Games, where we brought together what were then called young change makers to lead the young Olympians, the young athletes through the games process. And really, when we did the program, they were very active during the games. But when the flame died out, we waved goodbye, and that was it. And we said goodbye to them. And we just felt that that was such a shame, because we really got to meet some incredible people, some really inspiring young people. And we knew that they wanted to give something back. So in 2016, we launched a pilot. And we put our money where our mouth was, and we really stumped up some cash and said, right, we know, we believe in you guys. We know that you want to be part of a solution. We know that you have these incredible ideas for how sport can really make a difference in your communities. And we know that what's often holding you back is access to connections, access to networks, and access to funding. So we allowed them to apply for up to 5,000 Swiss francs. And we kicked that off in 2016. And we're now in 2020. So over those 4 years, we've seen the programs rise each year. And we've kept it, as you can see, it started small. And this was really because, I'll get to this when we discuss the key challenges. We really wanted to make sure we had a proof of concept first. There was no point in launching 100 programs if we couldn't back them up. So we've started slowly, and in this year we've had 52 programs from the IOC Young Leaders. But programs are one thing, it's the reach that we're interested in and how they've actually impacted individuals. And I think by now we have 25,000 there, but I'm sure by now it's over 30,000 individual participants impacted. And I don't mean people ticking like on a Facebook post. I mean people actually taking part in a program and being impacted and touched by sport that were delivered by these young leaders. You can see here the journey. I won't go into too much details, but just for you to know, every year we bring the IOC Young Leaders together for a youth summit, and this is our opportunity to meet with them, for them to share best practice with the other young leaders, and for them to get to meet some experts in the field of sport for social development. And we also give them obviously some leadership training. Two important milestones for us: in 2017 we secured funding from Panasonic. That helped us to boost the program in terms of funding, and in 2019 we also had a partnership with the Eunice Sports Hub. I'll get onto this in terms of learnings, but this being the idea that when it comes to youth empowerment, don't think that you have all the answers. We really need to use experts in the field where you can, and if you don't have the answers, young people are very forgiving, and they would rather you were honest and explain that you didn't have the answers and find solutions elsewhere than try and fob them off. And since the development of the program, I will say that really they have become the global agents of Olympism in Action. You may be aware, but in 2018, just ahead of Buenos Aires, the IOC held its first ever public conference called Olympism in Action, and the young leaders played a big role in that, and they were definitely a big hit at the summit because they speak honestly, they speak authentically, and they bring an energy and a passion to a field that has generally and somewhat unfairly been seen as a bit staid sometimes. The Olympic movement can sometimes feel like it's older white gentlemen with grey hair, but actually everyone on this call I'm sure has been touched by Olympism, and the young leaders did a fantastic job at Olympism in Action, demonstrating that it was very much alive and well in the younger generation, and that the IOC since 2016 has been empowering and entrusting them to be these agents. So that's where we are now in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, extremely fast learning curve, I'm sure, over just a couple of years. Can you tell us about one or two main challenges? Because I understand you have not built up a whole team to support these guys within the IOC. It's never been really the objective. But what were the main challenges to support these young guys to make their projects more sustainable and more impactful?
So I would say, going back to what I mentioned earlier, the first challenge was getting people to believe in the program. While we believed in it, because Philippe and I had seen these guys in action at the Youth Olympic Games, we'd heard of stories, we really believed that this was not an exercise in ticking a box. It wasn't about youth being on a panel because we needed to bring the age down. What we really wanted to do is invest in them. And it took a while for people to really understand that young people do have ideas. And it is in a way scary for some people to give up that right to have the answers and to be the ones who are the creatives, and to say, you know, maybe it is time to listen and it is time to give them some space. And I think very much so, actually, we were quite lucky. I think while there were frustrations on our side, we really, if you look at the timeline, things did move quite quickly. And by 2017, we had our first 7 IOC Young Leaders as commission members. And in 2019, we had a further 9. So we have now 16 IOC Young Leaders as commission members, and that is the highest level of executive decision-making within the Olympic movement. So I think we've proven ourselves. That was a key challenge, but really I wouldn't say that was anything we've done. That's really the impact of these guys and just giving them a platform to deliver what we knew they could. So that was a key challenge for sure.
One more question before we move on to 2 of these amazing young people. Can you tell us a little bit more how you're leveraging on that network of young leaders and on the program to push for more sports and more youth to be really embraced within the whole UN agenda and move towards the SDGs? Yeah,
well, certainly, as I mentioned earlier, a key learning in youth empowerment is understanding that you're not the experts. Another understanding is that you are not the only youth youth network. There are dozens of youth networks and communities out there, and I feel like we have an opportunity and we have a obligation on behalf of the young leaders to connect them to these networks. And I really believe in cross-pollination. So where there are other youth networks, we try and connect them. For example, One Young World, which has over 10,000 amazing young people around the world, they didn't really have much of a sport trend across their community. And so we've tried to connect our young leaders with them. We also have a couple of global shapers connecting to the World Economic Forum. There are numerous hackathons that go along the world, all over the world, as well as various UN organisations. I know ENSCO Youth is on the line, and last year we opened up the IOC Young Leaders to the ENSCO Youth. So really we're trying to connect the dots and wherever possible get sport round the table, and young people are really advocates of getting sport round the table, and they are often, while we often think that we are the ones that opening the doors, they are often the ones opening the doors for us to networks that we wouldn't necessarily be connected to.
Very encouraging.
So it's been a fantastic,
very encouraging, Kate, and we look forward to inviting you to another webinar in 3 years and telling us even more about the progress of the project inside the IOC and the whole movement. Hold on, Kate, because we might get some questions for you later on, but I'd like to welcome Laura and Babacar now, two of the IOC Young Leaders. Laura is from Estonia, but she's been in Copenhagen for quite a few years now, and for a couple of weeks, a month in Stockholm as well. And as you can see on these couple of images, sorry, I didn't ask for your permission, Laura, it's all on the web. You can guess that she's quite a talkative activist in the world of sports. Lovely to have you around us. And Babacar also, who's from Senegal. I hope he's not driving anymore and he's safe in an office right now, and he will join us in a couple of minutes with a few questions and answers. Babacar is working closely with the National Olympic Committee and the organizing committee for Dakar 22. As you know, the next edition of the Summer Youth Olympic Games will be hosted in Africa. So Laura, just tell us in a nutshell, what was the nature of your project? I understand you had 2 or even 3 projects already delivered under the IOC Young Leader banner. What's the nature of your projects in 2 words, and what made you decide to participate? What was your reaction when you got invited to apply?
Yeah, thank you so much. Do you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Ah, perfect. Okay, so I'm Laura calling in from Stockholm. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. I've been involved with IOC Young Leaders, and when it was called back then Young Ambassadors, since 2014, and it has been really an amazing journey. And as Kate pointed out as well, we had this opportunity to go with our national delegation to the Youth Olympic Games and encourage the young athletes to take part in the cultural and educational program. And after that, I wanted to still have a say, to have a voice, and to make a change in my local community and really address the local challenges that I saw based on my own experience. So my IOC Young Leader projects were focused on judo, because I was a former judo player myself, and I saw how many challenges young females and girls have in this sport, and I thought that I can help there based on my own experience. So it really came from a personal level, and I was focusing on female empowerment. So to really empower on an individual level the participants that I saw in the Estonian judo scene, to keep them motivated to build a community, but also work on the systematic level with the Estonian Judo Federation, so they would change their perception and communication that they have around judo, so that you wouldn't use only male athletes on the competition posters, that you would have a diversity check based on what kind of visuals you use on your websites, and how to really make the communication inclusive, so that other girls and women would feel more comfortable to get in touch with judo. So the funny example that I have is that if you Google judo, then you see more pictures of Putin that you see of women or girls doing judo. So there's so many levels where the inequality runs in the judo world. So I hope that I can do something about it. So that was the short summary of my projects.
And thank you very much. And based on your experience with the IC program, but also with other sports organizations, what would you say are the main barriers and hurdles to empower more young people and young talents in the governance of sport?
I think it was a very good overview what you gave on the policy level, that there are some youth policies in check, also in the sport level, but they're not really focusing on the governance level and engaging, empowering youth to be involved in decision making. So I think this is something that we really need to work on. And as the IOC has been really pushing for change and leading the example in gender equality and women in sport, and having really good strategic documents and action plans that are an example to other national and international federations, the same could be done for in the youth field, to have a youth strategy in place and to focus on all of the aspects that you brought out in your youth policy overview. So I think that would be really nice. And to use youth less as a token, to, you know, to not bring the age down, to have one young person or one female on the panels, etc.
Coming back to your projects as a young leader and being a young social entrepreneur through sports, and you guys are all in your 20s now, what would you say are the main challenges for such projects through sports to become sustainable and self-funded and to be scaled up? What would you need to be able to grow with these projects?
I think one of the very important things is just to believe in the youth and the power they have and trust them as well. So you put your money where your words are. So the IOC gave financial support, and they gave us the independence and the trust to run our own projects. And this is something very rare that, you know, you could be in your 20s or even below that, and someone gives you this money and they give you enough trust, but also they give you the knowledge and bring you together to mentor you, to help you, to bring the expertise and really trust you to lead that change and be a role model for other young leaders. So we wouldn't be the leaders of tomorrow, but we are already the leaders of today.
Now, my last question to you before we move on to Babacar is not a joke. It's a serious question, but with Kate, we noted with every round of IOC Young Leader project that we had more candidates and more projects coming up from young female entrepreneurs. Why is that?
That is a very intriguing question. I would be very curious to hear if you came up with any good answers to that. But I think it could be the perception that females engage more with voluntary work. I think it could be that because young men are seen as more as responsible to be the breadwinners and do like real serious jobs, not of this small, maybe more social impact projects. So maybe that could be one of the reasons. I'm not really sure. We should have a look at a diversity check into this as well.
Or the level of generosity in the DNA, maybe. We'll see.
Maybe.
Babacar, can you turn on your mic and even your camera, maybe, so we can welcome you? Babacar is joining in from Dakar in Senegal. Can you hear me, Babacar?
Hey, Phil.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining. Pretty much same questions to you, Babacar. If you could tell us in 2 words the nature of your project. You're actually running your second project under the IOC Young Leader program right now. Tell us a little bit about your projects and why you applied. What was the decision elements that made you apply to the IOC program?
Okay, thank you very much, Phil, and good morning, everybody. My name is Babacar, IOC Young Leader from Senegal, as Philippe told us later. So I work as an IT in my government, and actually I'm running. I would say like with the IOC, I have launched 2 projects since 2018, and last year. On 2018, my project was about social inclusion of 150 orphan living in foster care, and the aim was to target to reach them through sport by letting them know the values they can reach on sport and everything related to that, as that they can feel themselves on the society and express themselves more and more. And my second project this year is about sensitize people suffering from diabetes and showing them that they can have well-being and healthy life with sport. So this was my project as IOC Young Leaders. And to respond to your question about why have I applied in the project, I will say like it was because I want to bring change in my community, as everybody, I think. And previously, I was in Buenos Aires as a young change maker only to promote the Olympic Games and help my athletes to feel the games like for them to be memorable. And I can say that this program give me the motivation to apply project.
Okay, we lost you for a few seconds. Yeah. So let's maybe rebound on the next question regarding your experience within sports organizations, because you've been in touch with your National Olympic Committee, with the organizing committee also for Dakar 2020. What does it take in your African context? What does it take to empower young talents? Is it challenging in your experience within sports organizations to entrust young people and give them more responsibilities?
I would say, like, actually it's a little bit complicated because you know, I don't know in the other part of the world, but in Africa it's complicated sometimes to have young people empowered in their organization, because usually they are old people on board and they don't want to be challenged by young people. So sometimes it's a challenge for us to lead some project and join. But for Dakar 2022, actually there is nothing clear yet. We are not working. They haven't opened the works for youth, but we are working with I'm building a community of youth, trying to get them know that we have to play a big role on these games. And even like they don't associate us in the board team, but we have to be more impactful in our community and bring our own participation.
And can you tell us in 2 words as well, why is it so important to empower young people in Africa? What is specific to Africa? Because I understand you are a very youthful continent, right?
Yeah, we are a very useful continent because as you know that 6% of the population are under 25 years, and you know, many people here don't find works. We are facing a crisis in society, like to have to find a job. So in sport, I think like everybody can find his way inside, and everybody has a role to play in sport, because you're not mandatory to have a diploma to help or to bring your skills and trying to face some challenge. So I think here to empower more people, it will be it's an obligation for us to help to empower more young people, because they are home, they are doing nothing, and they have a big role, as I said later, they have a big role to play in this continent in the field of sport.
So very important role for sports on the continent in terms of employment, but also in terms of active and healthy living. As you said, your second Young Leader project is on fighting sedentarism and non-communicable disease, which is sadly growing as an issue on the continent. We'll stop here with the questions and answers, and we'll open the floor to the whole group. But I will turn to Geert to tell us whether we have questions or whether he wants to shoot the first questions to some of us.
It's great to hear all the good stories. It's great to hear all the things that went well. But what we learn most from is things that did not go well, things that we did wrong, mistakes that we made. It's always tricky to share them. But would you be able to share one big lesson that you learned, one thing that didn't work at all, or do I dare saying a mistake that you made? Because those are the things that are important, I think, for us to know as well. Kate, Philippe?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, sorry, my computer played up. I think for me, and this will be reflected in, I didn't have time to go into it, but we will launch version 2 of IOC Young Leader at the end of the year. For me, I would say a big mistake we made would be understanding that we could create sustainable programs in a year, because a year just isn't long enough. And I would say, while it wasn't maybe not a mistake, maybe it was naive, but we ended up having a lot of what I would call sugar hits. So where you have events or one-day initiatives that are fantastic, and we would never want to detract people from doing that, but they do not have that long-term sustainable element. And we really want to move toward the social business, the sustainable programs, and for that you need longer. So for that, we will launch version 2 of the program, which will be a 4-year acceleration lab. So where you have each year developing an aspect of the program, and where we can carefully scale the program and look at how they can create their own sustainable model.
And if I may add one challenge that we face, and it's easier for me to say that now that I'm outside the IOC, but I would say it's the bureaucracy. We were bound to work through the National Olympic Committees, and in some cases, the main challenge that the young leader faced was accessing the funding and the support that we wanted to provide. So in some cases, what Babacar just explained in terms of young people challenging the older people well established and in a position of power was really experienced at the ground level. So ideally, the less bureaucracy you can have, the more trust and direct link you can have with the young change makers and leaders in the community, the better and the easier.
Okay, yeah, thank you. There's a question coming here, and I don't know, Kate, if you have a camera when you're speaking, if you can switch on your camera, but there's a question coming here from Thomas Daalman, who's from the Royal Belgian Football Association. There's a bit of a Dutch-like directness in it, but I like it, so I'll just throw it in the group. There is an issue often when you start mixing younger and older generations. So he asks, what is your advice on bringing older people together with younger people on sensitive topics across generations, such as diversity? How do you tackle that? Because you somehow have to crack it. Laura?
Can I take it first? Okay. It's also one of my new favorite topics to discuss, this intergenerational discussions, etc. And I think the first thing is just to give opportunities for more youth, especially the ones who are less well off or come from not such a privileged background. This is very important, just to bring the stakeholders to the same table and to just have the opportunity to talk to each other. That's the one first thing. And secondly, I would really like to encourage this mentoring aspect and bringing less and more experienced people involved in sports together and just talk to each other. I feel this is lacking for me so much, especially coming from an Eastern European country where the power distance is really high, that this was not an option for me. I would like to learn from my older peers, from my older generation and the peers and the more experienced people, but I didn't have this opportunity. So I think this is something that we could address very specifically.
And Philippe, what's your experience when there is this big, you showed this graph, like this big hierarchy in certain countries where there's sort of the natural distance between older generation and younger generation. How do you crack that?
It is a challenge, it's a reality, but we have to play around it. I'm a strong believer that there's a universality about the willingness of young talents to change the world and contribute to that change. They just need to be given an opportunity. So even in those countries with a high level of power distance, it's a matter of not falling into the trap of stereotypes or generalization. There will always be talents that are just wishing and waiting to make change, but also there will always be also some experienced people who are ready to become mentors, and they just need to be given an opportunity. It's not, we can't put everybody in the same basket, I think. So I think that that gives hope also for Babacar in Dakar and Senegal and the rest of Africa. I think that we have to go against these stereotypes, and we have to also build up on very concrete examples that are well built, that are delivering. And another challenge we have linked to that is going beyond just the wishy-washy commitments and nice visions and objectives, and getting down to metrics, measuring, getting the evidence of changes being delivered in the community, and showing how powerful young people are. The more we build very strong, compelling stories, the more some of the older generations will be aware that, hey, they have an army of young people who can help them deliver their vision, instead of considering young people just as a target group and as a marketing segment. That's what really usually, pisses me off, is whenever you hear about a youth strategy within an organization, they think youth as in a marketing term, as in, a target that we need to raise because our average audience is 61. Shoot, so we have to address young people.
But it's interesting that you say that, because I'm going to flip it and taking a question from Ziga. we're blaming the old people, we're blaming the older generation, but his question is, how do you change the mentality of young people to convince them that in projects, money should not be the main motivator, but the greater cause? How do you get the young people excited and involved?
I don't know if I completely agree with this, because as we see, like the millennial generation and the youth movement right now, they are pushing for this social change to support behind the sustainable development goals. I think it's rather the opposite way, and the youth generation is more of altruistic intentions and motivations behind their actions. But if there are any more opinions, would love to hear them.
How do you see that, Babacar? How's that in Senegal with the youngsters?
I think like people here, they are committed and they just want to have a chance. They just want people who get them know how things are going on administration, how to lead. And personally, I don't think like they have this chance. Many of them, they don't have this chance. And as I'm not really agree with Ziga, but yeah, we have a lot of motivated people here, but we are not going to reach all the youth in the country, but just those who are committed in the federation, even they don't have chance to lead. So yeah.
If I may, Geert, I think the one of the key success factors is looking at what it means personally. So if you said to a young person, you can change, you know, you can have a huge impact on the climate change of the world, that might fall a bit flat. But if you say to a young person, you could change where you swim every weekend by organising a cleanup of the beach, or suggesting it this way, there is no need to look at the global big picture at first stab. You know, we need to start at the grassroots, and that's why I think the IOC Young Leaders program has been successful, because we didn't come with an idea we enforced on these young leaders. They came with their ideas that fitted to their community and their challenges. So I think you have to find ideas that suit someone, a particular individual, and that has to come from them. To Babacar's point, you're not going to get everyone to be a young leader. You know, the world is diverse, and that's fantastic, and we need people to have different motivations, but focus on the positive and those that do want to raise their hand, and I think you'll get the change, rather than those that need convincing.
Yeah. We're kind of getting close to 3 o'clock, and I want to respect time, so I'll just take one more question that comes in from Thomas Roos, who is himself an athlete, I know, from the USA and studying in Switzerland. Hello, Thomas, good to have you on the call. And he's asking very specifically, how can we follow Norway's example to get more IFs and NFs to ensure commissions have young members? Are there any best practices that you can share?
I mean, the best practice we can share is for the IOC to lead at the moment. And we lead by obviously having our IOC commission members, but with the IOC Young Leaders are also speaking on panels. They're part of the Olympism in Action focus group. And I think if there are particular IFs that you're involved in that you'd like someone to come and speak to about youth empowerment, we're always here ready and willing to go and discuss now that we have a proof of concept. And I think if anything, if IFs need direction, just tell them to look at Olympic Agenda 2020, and the third pillar, of which there are only 3, is youth. So if they need direction, it's there.
Thank you. Yeah. Any final comments from you, Philippe?
Can I also comment on the last one, on what Kate said?
Of course, go for it.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of direction available, but often it's the question of political will, because it also involves giving up a little bit of your own power, or the power of the people who are in charge right now. So this is a very difficult thing to address, but I think the countries and the IFs that are doing already and engaging the youth should speak up more about the values and the benefits and the impact that this has. As we can see in Scandinavia, they are very reserved and shy, I would say. So we need to boost and share some of these stories and the impact that this has had, and to encourage and inspire more, because we know diversity has all of these great benefits, but it needs to be just reach into the minds of the decision makers.
Okay. And Geert, just to follow up on that, I would say that until you have goals and targets and you make sure you're not into a tick the box exercise, and you hold, making sure you hold people accountable, nothing much will change. So it needs to be really built into mid to long term strategies with concrete results down the line.
Okay, thank you. Just in closing for Kate and Laura and Babacar, you know, we all know that Philippe is a very powerful man, and since we have people from many countries here, just imagine that Philippe can arrange a meeting with the leader of your country, and you have 30 seconds to make your point. What is the single thing? What is the most important thing that you're gonna ask him or tell her to do? So what is your key point to address to your country's leader when it comes to youth engagement?
Do you want us to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
I would say entrust and empower.
Which means?
Which means don't speak for them. Okay. We did it for years and it didn't work. So just trust them.
Dear leaders, trust them, listen to them.
And they will be part of the solution.
I would go from my side. I mean, I wish I would have the opportunity to speak up myself rather than someone else speaking for me, if I understood that correctly. But I think put your money where your mouth is. And if you're interested in youth engagement, you need to allocate real resources and real responsibility for the youth. And the trust component is also really important, that Kate said. So those are my key takeaways.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I would say the same as Kate and Laura. Just support them, give them more confidence as that they can express themselves. Let them discover the skills that are inside them, and help them to lead.
Thank you all very much. And I just want to extend my thanks to all of you who have been on this call, for all your comments and all your questions that you put in the chat. If we didn't manage to respond to your question, or you haven't been able to type it up, I'll leave the session open for another couple of minutes, so feel free to type it in the chat box, and we'll follow up with an email anyway. So if there's more specific questions, we can respond to that by email. Rest me nothing more than to give a big virtual applause to Babacar, Laura, Kate, and Philippe. Just join me in a round of applause to them. Thank you for all the work you're doing. Keep up the good work. In very closing, we as SandSI are obviously, as a membership organization, always looking for new members. So this is a 30-second pitch that if you're interested to find out more about SandSI or become a member, by all means, do send me an email, and we would love to see more young athletes and sport organizations becoming part of the organization. I want to leave it here. I want to stop here. You have our contact details here, contact details of Philippe and myself, if you would like to follow up with a specific question. As I said before, we will share some materials. We will share the recording of this session with you in the next few days. Thank you all again for being here, and I wish you a great remainder of the day wherever you are in the world, and let's keep up the good work. Thank you.